Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Welcome. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The federal Conservatives have brought forth a non-confidence motion in Parliament. But will it be enough to bring down the Liberal government? The United Conservative Party of Alberta has their candidate for the riding of West Lethbridge. He is former Lethbridge Police Chief and current City Councillor John Middleton Hope. And a frightening new study reveals how a large percentage of nurses, all under the age of 35, are leaving the healthcare industry in Canada.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. Federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre brought forth his non-confidence motion in Parliament. It kicked off a debate which will wrap up on Wednesday. Poilievre says he's hoping, like the Tories, other parties will agree that all confidence is lost in the Trudeau government and it needs to be brought down.
This government has doubled the cost of housing, doubled the debt, forced 2 million people to the food bank, raised taxes, and now they want a 61-cent a litre carbon tax that will grind our economy to a halt. The good news is, in a carbon tax election, Canadians can axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget, and stop the crime. Can we bring it home now?
You know, many Canadians agree with the federal Tories that we should have a carbon tax vote so that we can go to the polls early, not having to wait until next October. But according to Sun political columnist Brian Lilly, it doesn't appear, however, as though the government will be defeated anytime soon.
Let's grab something. I mean, that was Yves-Francois Blanchet's statement. Let's grab something. So he's being brazen. He's being out front. He wants a payment in exchange for his party's votes. So Jagmeet Singh doesn't even need to show up. His party doesn't need to show up. They could all have the cold. They could have the flu. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we had a meeting at the time of the vote. Instead, he came out and said he will vote against Pierre Poilievre's non-confidence motion. To what end? You have described the government in the most horrible terms. You have said they do not deserve a second chance, and yet you're going to vote for them.
Mr. Lilly will also discuss a block motion that would impact our seniors, boosting old age security payments by about 10%. He'll have details coming up later in our broadcast. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in New York visiting the United Nations and making an appearance on the Stephen Colbert Show. He said he was surprised that the Bloc wants to see more support for seniors, especially considering that they voted against the Canadian Dental Care Plan, which directly impacts those who are 65 plus.
It's interesting that the Bloc is talking about supporting seniors when they voted against and stood against the Canadian Dental Care Plan that has already helped over 700,000 people, mostly seniors, access affordable dental care. So I'm going to continue to work with any progressives in this House that want to deliver for Canadians in concrete ways. I'm always ready to talk about what more we can do for vulnerable seniors.
Premier Danielle Smith announced that in a few short weeks, her government will be introducing legislation to amend the Alberta Bill of Rights. Smith says the changes will reaffirm the values that make Alberta one of the freest jurisdictions on planet Earth. She took to her Facebook page offering a couple of examples of some of those changes.
One of the amendments we are making to the Bill of Rights is to reinforce the right of every Albertan to make their own choices regarding the medical treatments they receive. This includes ensuring that every individual in our province who has the mental capacity to do so will have the right to decide whether or not to receive a vaccination or other medical procedure. In recent years, we've seen the challenges and hardship that can arise when that right to bodily autonomy is not adequately protected. It is my firm conviction that no Albertan should ever be subjected or pressured into accepting a medical treatment without their full consent. For me, this addition to the Bill of Rights is about recognizing that in Alberta, we believe that individuals have the right to make informed decisions about their own bodies without fear of undue pressure or interference by government. The amended Bill of Rights will also strengthen property rights, another cornerstone of living in a free and democratic society. The amendments will ensure that no Albertan can be deprived of their property without due process of law and just compensation. This is a reaffirmation of your right to own and enjoy the property that you've worked so hard for.
The UCP now has their candidate for the Lethbridge West riding. Lethbridge City Councillor John Middleton Hope won on the first ballot Monday night when he received 2 votes over 50%. He defeated Aaron Leclerc, a former constituency office manager, and Shauna Grunninger, a Lethbridge real estate agent. The final vote tally was 289 votes for Middleton Hope to Leclerc's 193. Grunninger, meanwhile, received 51 votes. On social media, Premier Daniel Smith congratulated Middleton Hope, the former Lethbridge police chief, saying, "The United Conservatives of Lethbridge West have nominated John Middleton Hope as their new candidate to reclaim the seat and add another common-sense voice to our team." Middleton Hope will now take on former Lethbridge City Councillor Rob Miyashiro with the NDP. He says, he's up for the challenge.
I think people in Lethbridge have a choice, and that choice is, do they want to continue with the New Democrats and have a representative from Lethbridge in opposition for the next 3 years, or do they want to elect somebody who can win against Rob Miyashiro, who is going to actually be part of the government and is not only a part of the government, but is able to advocate on behalf of the citizens of Lethbridge for the next 3 years.
Lethbridge West has been without an MLA since July 1st after former NDP cabinet minister Shanna Phillips stepped down. Rob Miyashiro, who will be battling Middleton Hope for the Lethbridge West riding, is the executive director of the Lethbridge Senior Citizens Organization. Now, he also served 2 terms on Lethbridge City Council. Miyashiro says his plan to keep Lethbridge West painted orange will be a cordial fight, highlighting his party's professional and emotional stability.
Jonah and I actually have a positive relationship. Whenever we see each other, we greet each other cordially. And part of the strategy of any political campaign is driven by the party as well as by the, in fact, even more so than the candidate. So and that's so people like me don't, go off on my own and become a loose cannon and embarrass everyone. So there's just certainly direction that we would be moving in.
Premier Daniel Smith hasn't announced a date yet for the by-election, but it must be called by the end of the year. Well, it was sunny and hot again today here in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is now with an early peek at the forecast. Jeanette, will the summer-like conditions continue into Wednesday?
They will, Hal, and we do mean hot. Now, the average high for this time of year is 18 degrees, so we're soaring well above that for these couple of days, reaching that high of 29 today. 13, the overnight low this evening. Still fairly warm for September overnight, and then once we get into tomorrow, Wednesday, we're seeing a high of 30 degrees. We're also contending with a bit of wind, though, along with that heat. So we're seeing up to 50-kilometer-per-hour wind gusts today, and then starting tomorrow around noon, we're going to see those windy gusts again, climbing up to 60 kilometers per hour tomorrow. So I'll be back later in the show to give you that full 7-day forecast, and I'll give you a sneak peek. It's not going to be quite as hot.
That was a nice sunshiny yellow dress. Thanks so much, Jeanette. New research says a number of young nurses are leaving the healthcare profession here in Canada. The report from the Montreal Economic Institute says around 40% of nurses, all under the age of 35, are bailing on the industry in Canada, while here in Alberta, the number's even higher at 48%. The co-author of the report, Crystal Videvrangel, explains why so many nurses are wanting out and why some are considering moving to the United States.
It is a lack of long-term flexibility and the structural components that make an already difficult job harder. We've got mandatory overtime, you've got a lack of shift flexibility, and really very little to no work-life balance. We do see nurses that are licensed in one province actually working across the border in the United States. So that's definitely a component, but there's also nurses who are leaving to work in these independent staffing agencies, where at least they're being caught in those agencies to continue to provide care for Albertans and Canadians, but they're not doing it in the public system and unfortunately are costing the system more money to do so.
Videvrangel says the restructuring of AHS needs to be examined and how the decentralization can better support frontline workers. The Saskatchewan government is in court fighting to prevent the Court of King's Bench judge from deciding if its parents' Bill of Rights violates the Charter. Last year, the Scott Moe government announced that students under the age of 16 must have parental consent before they can change their names or pronouns in school. Now, those in the LGBTQ2+ community got a court injunction which put a stop to the use of the policy. So the Sask Party government used the notwithstanding clause, better known as the Parents' Bill of Rights, in an attempt to stop the court challenge. Last February, Judge Michael McGaugh ruled that UR Pride should get the chance to review the law's impact under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. The government, however, says since the court has no power to strike down a law, it should not be allowed to decide if the law violates the Charter. Lawyers also say UR Pride is abusing the court process by trying to hold the government to account. For over a year now, UR Pride and other advocate groups have been trying to halt the pronoun policies included in the Parents' Bill of Rights. Arguments in court continue this week. The man who died in Calgary police custody has been identified as 42-year-old John Wells, who's a member of the Blood Tribe. Back on September 17th, police in Calgary were called to the Carriage House Inn on reports of a man causing a disturbance and refusing to leave the property. Officers say they attempted to de-escalate the situation, however, struggle ensued, resulting in one officer pulling out a taser and another deploying pepper spray. Shortly after Wells was taken into custody, he went into medical distress and died at the scene despite efforts from EMS to revive him. John Wells was known as a champion rodeo participant, becoming a steer wrestling tour champion back in 2012. He previously served as the president of the Blood Tribe Ag Society. ACERT is investigating the incident and will release more details at a later date. A former Lethbridge businessman, Ronald James Aikens, who was sentenced to 4 years for fraud in a real estate scheme, is appealing his verdict and sentence. Over the course of 20 years, Aikens took part in a real estate scam, misleading around 1,400 investors to collect $35 million. They were told the money would go towards a parcel of land on the western boundary of Calgary to develop what was then called the Legacy Project. After he was charged in 2013 and convicted after a decade-long delay, Aikens fled to the United States on the day of sentencing. Authorities arrested him this past summer in Montana. Aikens' defense lawyer claims the judge's findings are not supported by the evidence and the 4-year term was excessive. Lethbridge Police Service is hosting the Social Disorder and Urban Crime Conference for the first time this week. Urban police services across the province converged at the Sandman Signature Hotel in our city to collaborate and share best practices to tackle a wide variety of issues such as substance abuse, crime, mental health, and poverty.
My vision of the event was to bring together different police services to kind of walk through what's working, what's not working, and learn from each other's successes and failures. As we've seen, there is no one answer to all these problems we're seeing in Western Canada in relation to the drug crisis, and it's important to learn from other organizations to save ourselves time, money, and wasted resources, basically. I would say one of the most consistent trends is the messaging that methamphetamine is extremely popular and is heavily used across Western Canada. When it comes to opiate deaths, the opiate crisis does draw a lot of attention to the media because a lot of really good people are losing their lives, and that heavily impacts our families in Southern Alberta. We've seen a reduction in overdose deaths in Southern Alberta, and I hope that that continues in that way.
While opioid use and overdoses reached a peak during the pandemic, officials say trends have been going downwards, which is good news. Lethbridge also dwarfed other major cities in our province in the number of visits to safe consumption sites from 2018 to 2020. National Truth and Reconciliation Week continues here in our city. The University of Lethbridge organized a special event on Tuesday featuring unique stickers and buttons. Lindy Shea, Director of Indigenous Services at the U of L, explains why this week is so important, especially for students.
And we really just want to promote positive awareness and to really bring all of our student body together to celebrate and honor. I've noticed each year it's grown, so a lot of students and different faculty and departments want to engage with our department more and more. So today is a really good example of all students coming in and participating. And then really the foundation of what we do is really to build relationships.
Promoting messages of hope, reconciliation, friendship, kindness. We have some that are orange in recognition of Orange Shirt Day coming up, and basically celebrating the Indigenous cultures that are represented here at the university and how we can all learn from each other.
By the way, this Thursday, the U of L will be recognizing Orange Shirt Day beginning at 2 p.m. September is being recognized as Alzheimer's Awareness Month around the world. According to the World Health Organization, 47.5 million people live with dementia, including Alzheimer's. Of those, about 750,000 Canadians suffer from Alzheimer's or another form of dementia. Dr. Robert McDonald, professor of neuroscience at the U of L, explains what neurodegenerative disorder, along with the symptoms, may look like.
What this means is that the brain starts to fall apart and degenerate and the cells die. In the early stages, it's very hard to distinguish it from other neurological disorders and diseases. Normally, it's the person or their caregivers. They just notice something's different. Maybe their personality changes slightly. And then into the middle stages, the sort of stage that most of us recognize as Alzheimer's is there's very specific memory impairments that are associated with it. And then at the late stages, the deficits become even more general. So broader deficits, sensory motor, motivational, as well as memory problems. It's a disease of aging in many senses. However, there is a rare form. It's called early onset Alzheimer's disease. It can be around 40 or 50 years old, and even some cases at 30, but it is very rare. So it's more common. It would start emerging in people around 65 and then higher percentages when you get into your 80s. So a very strong aging component to it. Most of what we know about the disease and the mechanisms behind it is for that early onset familial version, but that's only 5% of the population. The other 95% get the one that we don't really understand what's causing it.
Dr. McDonald says besides being mentally active, having a good diet, keeping stress levels low, and exercising regularly helps to protect our brains from dementia. Well, we enjoyed a mainly clear day here in Lethbridge, well above our normal for this time of year, and that trend should continue for the next day or so. Full weather details are coming up. So here we are, the third week of September, and for those of us who are blessed enough to have them, we still have our air conditioners running. Jeanette Rocher is now with a full look at the weather picture. Jeanette, we will only need to run the AC, however, for another maybe day or so?
True, because we are way above seasonal right now. After that, though, after we get past today and tomorrow, Wednesday, those highs of 29 and 30 degrees, a little bit of a different story. We're going to start to see temperatures get a little bit more closer to average for seasonal for this time of year. As we get into Thursday, high of 21 degrees, 24 for the high on Friday, which is still fairly high, back to 21 on Saturday with clear skies. And then as we get to the end of that weekend there, Sunday and getting into Monday, that's when we're seeing those seasonal averages for this time of year, highs of 18 and 19 on Sunday and Monday. So the average high for this time of year, 18 degrees, average low 4. Record high on this day was 35. That happened back in 2001. And it was a chilly minus 12 on this day back in 1926, and that was the record low for this day. So sun rose this morning at 7:21, sunset right at 7:23 rather. That means we're seeing just a little over 12 hours of daylight. It's about 12 hours, 2 minutes, about 3 minutes shorter than we saw yesterday. A bit of a rainy one on the west coast tomorrow. So Victoria seeing some periods of rain ending in the afternoon, high of 16. Lots of rain in Vancouver, seeing 10 to 15 millimeters there, high of 17 degrees, 29 for a high in Edmonton with clear skies, and a lovely 27 degrees in Calgary with a mix of sun and cloud. Calgary because also see 60 kilometer per hour winds tomorrow, just like Lethbridge. Okay, hot and sunny conditions across the rest of the prairies. 29 for the high in Saskatoon, could see up to 50K winds, so 30 for the high in Regina, up to 60K winds, and 26 for the high in Winnipeg with clear skies. So lots of sunshine there. Not so much as we get into the central part of the country. We're seeing lots of rainfall. So 40% chance of showers, risk of thunderstorms in Toronto tomorrow. High of 24 degrees, 17 for the high in Ottawa. Lots of rain, 10 to 20 millimeters of rainfall there, risk of thunderstorms. And then we could see periods of rain in Montreal tomorrow with a high of 16 degrees. Now we're seeing mainly slight chance of showers across the Maritimes here, 30% chance of showers in Fredericton, Halifax, and Charlottetown tomorrow. Highs of 19 in both Fredericton and Halifax and Charlottetown tomorrow. So it's kind of the same situation there, and we're seeing periods of showers or drizzle in St. John's tomorrow with a high of 13 degrees there. So there you have it. That's your forecast.
Unionized staff at 6 grain terminals in Metro Vancouver are all on strike. More than 600 people represented by the Grain Workers Union walked off the job after a deal with the Employers Association could not be reached. The union says it provided the employer with a comprehensive package last Thursday, but did not receive a counteroffer. The affected operations include terminals located in both Vancouver and North Vancouver. CIBC has become the latest Canadian bank to face large U.S. fines due to record-keeping violations. The Commodity Futures Trading Commission says a $30 million U.S. penalty was issued against the bank. The Securities and Exchange Commission also announced charges of $12 million U.S. against 2 separate CIBC divisions. This follows the use of unapproved communication methods for banks, including a personal text messaging and a failure to keep records of what was said. RBC, TD Bank Group, Scotiabank, and BMO have also previously paid fines related to the issue. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was up 57 basis points to 23,952. The Dow was also up 83 basis points to 42,208. The S&P 500 was up 14 points at 5,732, and the NASDAQ was up 100 points to 18,074. West Texas Intermediate oil was up $1.17 to $71.54 US per barrel. Natural gas was down in nickel to $2.58 US. Gold was up $29.70 to $26.8250 US an ounce, and silver was up $1.21 to $32.10 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $7.81 per bushel, barley is at $6.14, canola is at $13.60, and corn is at $7.44 per bushel. Live cattle October contract was down $1.30 to $183.15. Feeder cattle September contract was up 15 cents to $244.95, and lean hogs October contract was up 90 cents to $87.32. And the Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours and currently sits at 74.40 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, federal Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre brought forth his non-confidence motion in Parliament. It kicked off a debate which will wrap up on Wednesday. Poilievre says he's hoping, like the Tories, other parties will agree that all confidence is lost in the Trudeau government and it needs to be brought down. But so far, both the NDP and Bloc said they will vote against the motion. Sun political columnist Brian Lilley will have more on the non-confidence vote on Parliament Hill, along with the arguments Poilievre made for bringing forth his motion. He'll have details coming up shortly. When you see news happening in your community, be sure to drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. The federal Conservatives have tabled a non-confidence motion and kicked off a debate that will wrap up on Wednesday. Pierre Poilievre is really hoping that that carbon tax vote will bring down the Trudeau government, but will it? To chat about this in more detail is political columnist with The Sun, Brian Lilley, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, it appears as though we already know the outcome of the vote, with the NDP saying that they will support the Liberals. What, however, were the arguments that Poilievre was making during his speech to Parliament?
Yeah, look, I don't want to depress anyone who was hopeful for an early election to get rid of the Trudeau government, but, barring some unforeseen circumstance, I don't know, maybe people don't show up, maybe the House leaders aren't counting the votes right, this is going to fail. Not that it should, but it will fail because the Bloc Québécois and the NDP have both said that they're going to vote against the Conservative non-confidence motion. So what were Poilievre's arguments? He was saying things like, well, look, our economy is not doing as well as it used to. We are dealing with the carbon tax. Canadians are not making as much as Americans. Our economy is doing poorer than most. And it's interesting, the Trudeau government keeps coming out and saying, oh, on the macro level, we're doing great. And then Canadians look at the economy and they say, well, wait a minute. About a year and a half ago, unemployment was 5%. Now it's 6.6. Food is about 25% more than it was a couple of years ago. The Trudeau government keeps pointing to international studies and saying, well, the International Monetary Fund says this, or the G7 says that, or the OECD says this. You can't eat an OECD study, Hal. You need to be able to eat what you buy at the grocery store, and that costs a lot more than it used to. And so Canadians are seeing one thing, the Trudeau government is promoting another. That's part of what Poilievre's statement was. He gave a 10-minute speech in French, 10-minute speech in English that basically laid out why this government needs to be defeated. I don't think it will be defeated. And I don't think that anything is going to change because the Bloc and the NDP have decided, despite denouncing the government, that they're going to support them.
Now, the Bloc has been pretty blunt about why they're not supporting the motion. They obviously want a lot of spending for Quebec. But Brian, why did the NDP come out against the motion after calling the Liberals weak and selfish? I mean, why even bother ripping up the supply and confidence agreement?
I mean, this has been the question since, 2 weeks ago now, that Jagmeet Singh says, I'm ripping up the agreement. Now, look, I call it a coalition agreement. And by any dictionary definition, it is a coalition agreement. The official name of it is the Supply and Confidence Agreement. So if you rip up the Supply and Confidence Agreement, doesn't that mean you no longer have confidence in the government? You would think, but Jagmeet Singh has decided that he's going to vote confidence. He doesn't need to. The Bloc has already said, let's grab something. I mean, that was Yves-François Blanchet's statement. Let's grab something. So he's being brazen. He's being out front. He wants a payment in exchange for his party's votes. So Jagmeet Singh doesn't even need to show up. His party doesn't need to show up. They could all have the cold. They could have the flu. Oh, sorry. Yeah, we had a meeting at the time of the vote. Instead, he came out and said he will vote against Pierre Poilievre's non-confidence motion. To what end? You have described the government in the most horrible terms. You have said they do not deserve a second chance, and yet you're going to vote for them. All he's doing is undermining his own credibility going forward.
Now, one of the Bloc demands, Brian, for supporting the government could be pretty popular with seniors here in Canada. They want to boost old age security payments. Do we know if this is likely to happen, and if so, by how much?
The Trudeau government is not saying yes or no to this demand yet. But the basic demand, and the Bloc has many, and some Canadians outside of Quebec will support like this, and others they will be outraged at, and we'll get to that in a moment. But in terms of OAS, it was a year or so ago that the Trudeau government said, we are going to increase the old age security payment by 10%. Well, if you're a senior and you're getting OAS, you think, okay, great. But it only applies to those 75 and over. So anyone between 65 and 74 is saying, well, wait a minute, like OAS isn't great. If you're getting the full OAS payment, you are not well off. I think there are, reforms to be made to OAS. We still send payments to people who are earning in retirement more than $100,000. We're still sending them payments. They're small, but they're there. But if you're getting the full OAS payment, you are not well off. And the Trudeau government says, let's increase this by 10%, but only for those over 75. One of the Bloc's demands is, you will increase, if you want our votes, you will increase this payment for seniors between 65 and 74. And that's why I say the Bloc could end up becoming very popular with seniors across the country in areas where they really don't like separatism, like Alberta. I mean, if you're a 67-year-old in Red Deer and you're sitting there looking at this and saying, yeah, I'd like a 10% increase, you're going to support the Bloc in this. Crazy as that sounds, but that is one of the main issues. That would cost between $3 and $3.5 billion per year if this were to go forward, according to the parliamentary budget officer.
Now, another reason the Bloc, Brian, will not support the non-confidence vote is that their leader, Yves-François Blanchet, says he wants action on oil and gas. Now, what kind of action is he talking about here?
Basically, shut down the oil and gas sector. And so that, again, if you're a senior in Alberta, maybe you're looking at that OAS payment and saying, yeah, I'd like that. And then they say, but let's shut down the oil and gas sector. Ooh, wait, that's bad for the economy of my province. That's going to make my kids unemployed. That's going to make my grandchildren have fewer opportunities going forward. But that is what the Bloc wants. And this is part of the problem. Unfortunately, I don't think that Justin Trudeau is actually against that idea. I think he's probably in favor of it. That's the problem, is that we've got a Quebec-based prime minister If you speak to a lot of Quebecers, they will have questions about whether he's a Quebecer or not, whether he speaks good French or not. He's an Ottawa boy who, grew up at 24 Sussex, but he will succumb to their base requests over and over again. And so you've basically got a Quebec-based government that will give whatever is needed to give to a Quebec separatist party, which could end up hurting Alberta in big ways when it comes to the oil and gas sector and elsewhere in order to stay in power. There's no wonder that Premier Danielle Smith is outraged over this. I mean, if I were an Albertan, sometimes I think of myself as an Albertan at heart, but if I were an Albertan, I would be furious with what's going on.
Brian, doesn't Blanchette realize that the oil and gas sector contributes billions of dollars to the transfer payments, which are going to Quebec to help support Quebec?
Oh, don't worry about that. They'll find another way to take money from Alberta and give it to Quebec. I mean, that's basically their attitude. No, they don't worry about this. They don't think about this. It is just a view that you can shut down this industry, which is vital to the entire Canadian economy.
Yeah.
You can shut this down and don't worry about it for a second.
So it doesn't appear as though much will become of the non-confidence vote, so no early election here. But you believe, however, that we could possibly see another non-confidence vote maybe later this week?
Yeah, so the Liberal government has decided that they're going to front load all the opposition days. So the Conservatives have an opposition day today, and there will be a vote on the non-confidence motion on Wednesday. So none of us expect that the government will fall. Unless people are bad at math, the government will not fall. Joe Clark was bad at math. His minority government fell. I don't think that's going to happen in this case. But they've given the Conservatives another opposition day on Thursday. So I was chatting back and forth with people in Poilievre's office and said, why are you bringing forward another non-confidence motion? And they said, well, we don't know that we are, but that is a possibility. So they're going to put forward a number of motions that will be on the order paper later today. And then on Thursday, they can decide which one they want to do. So it could be a non-confidence motion on Thursday. It could be something else. They'll call an audible. You and I are football fans, Hal. They'll call an audible on Thursday morning and decide what it's going to be. It's just a matter of, what is good for them politically. There's no, once you've got Jagmeet Singh and the Bloc leader, Yves-François Blanchet, standing up and voting to support the Trudeau government, I'm not sure that there's really any political gain to be had from having them do that again a couple days later.
Brian, it was 4.5 years ago that the Trudeau government promised to ban thousands of guns and launched the so-called gun buyback program. Now, it turns out the initiative cost tens of millions of dollars and has not taken a single gun. How do they justify this?
Because they're making the world safer, Hal. I mean, this is what they'll tell you. I mean, it's not true. But yeah, $67 million on the so-called gun buyback program. And look, for all your viewers who are yelling at us for calling it a gun buyback program, I know some heads are exploding over the use of that term. That's the government's term. They said they're going to buy back guns. Well, the government didn't own them to begin with. So it's not, buyback is not, the proper term. But they said that they were going to buy guns off of people who had them banned. I've got I don't own any AR-15s. In fact, I don't own any guns. There's guns in my house. I don't own any. But I've got friends who own AR-15s. They have been illegal to take even to the range for more than 4 years. Have you heard of AR-15s being used in crimes in Canada? The impetus for this was the Nova Scotia mass shooting, the mass casualty incident that happened down there in April of 2020. Where did that guy who had prior convictions for violent offenses, who was banned from owning guns. Where did he get them? He bought them in the United States and smuggled them across the border. And so this is the ongoing problem, is that the Trudeau government does not deal with the real issue. They deal with the issue that will get them votes. That is the issue front to end when it comes to the Trudeau government. It is about getting votes. It is not about what is best for the country.
Brian, social media was lit up after it was discovered that Toronto area schools took their students on a field trip, which ended up at a pro-Palestinian rally. Ontario Premier Doug Ford said it was disgraceful and ridiculous that teachers brought their kids to a rally. How can something like this even happen?
Because we've allowed our school system to be overtaken by activists. And, most of us are just trying to live our lives. We think that the school system is working in our favor. And look, most teachers are great. Most teachers just want to go to work and teach kids how to read, how to write, how to do arithmetic, geography, history, what have you. But then there's this small group of activist teachers. And for anyone sitting, watching us, sitting, whether in Lethbridge, Red Deer, Prince Albert, I don't care where you are. If you're watching and you think, wow, this is just a Toronto thing. No, it's not. This is across the country that we've got a small group of activist teachers who cause problems for everyone, especially our students. And so the permission slip for this, for most students, said that they would not be participating in a protest, that they would be going to watch a protest rally for an Indigenous community called Grassy Narrows. It's in Northern Ontario. Back in the 1960s, they had their water supply polluted by a local paper plant, and it was filled with mercury. They can't fish, they can't drink the water. This is horrible. Nobody would agree with that. That's a horrible thing, and that should be rectified in some way. And yet, this rally ends up with students being told, wear blue to show that you are a settler. Students being handed stickers that say Zionism kills. What does that have to do with a First Nation in Northern Ontario near the Manitoba border? We've got, people chanting and encouraging the students, and we've seen video of this, from Turtle Island to Palestine, occupation is a crime. Okay, so you could look at that and say that's anti-Semitic, and absolutely, I think it is. But beyond that, wait a minute, Al. Turtle Island to Palestine, what are they talking about? They are saying that Canada, which they will not name, they'll call it Turtle Island because they don't think Canada is a real place. Occupation is a crime. You and me, most of your viewers, are not Indigenous. But these folks are saying that if you are not 100% Indigenous, you are an occupier. What is an occupier? They're a criminal. That's what we're teaching our students. That's what we're teaching young children. That seems completely at odds with what we believe as a society, what we believe as a country. And again, I say to you, do not think that this is just happening in Toronto. This is happening in Red Deer. This is happening in Calgary. This is happening in Lethbridge, in Edmonton, anywhere across the country. You've got a small group of activist teachers pushing this agenda, which is highly political and dangerous for our country.
Brian, we only have about 30 seconds left here, but I want to chit-chat with you a bit about our jet-setting Prime Minister who was in New York recently, appeared on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. Liberal supporters are loving it, but Tory supporters are hating or completely ignoring it. What's your take?
My take is that Justin Trudeau is using his trip to the UN, including, showing up on the Colbert Report. It was, an awful interview. It was horrible. But he's using his entire trip to New York as a domestic campaign message. Look, Trudeau is not resonating with Canadians right now on the domestic front. Sometimes when prime ministers go outside of the country, they end up generating more news domestically than they would if they made the same message somewhere inside the country. And so his message to the UN, his message on Colbert, all of it is directed at trying to get votes here in Canada.
Political columnist with the Sun newspaper, Brian Lilly. Thanks so much for joining us today from Toronto.
Thank you, Hal.
Hollywood often portrays fathers as being a little goofy and sometimes not the sharpest knives in the drawer, which I believe is quite sad considering the powerful role that fathers play in society today. And according to our Heavenly Father, fatherhood is also very important when you read that in the Bible. Now, to discuss this in more detail is Rowan Crown. He's the lead pastor of Amazing Grace Community Church here in Lethbridge. Pastor Rowan Crown, welcome back to Bridge City News.
Thank you for having me, Hal. It's good to be here.
So, Pastor Owen, many would agree that fathers play a very important role in the family dynamic. But sometimes, as dads, we do make mistakes. And those flubs can sometimes leave lasting hurts on our children. How can we really rebuild that relationship?
Yeah, I first want to start off by saying that I do not come here as the number one example of a father. And it's important to know that we are people who make mistakes, and I've failed as a father many times. So I think the first thing is recognizing our weaknesses as a father and how much we need the Lord and the Lord's guidance as we are fathers to our children, and really fathers to others, or examples of fathers to others in our lives.
So as dads, you talked about guidance from our Heavenly Father. How about wisdom as well, that we really rely on God's word and maybe seek more insight in his word as a proper way of being a good father?
Yeah, I think, Hal, it's a very difficult time in which we live in, where the role of the father, as you said, by community examples or the examples in the world, that fathers are not looked upon as what Scripture would really portray fathers as. And so it's important that we look to God's word, we look to the wisdom of God and the fear of the Lord in order to help us to walk humbly as fathers and allow his fatherhood in our lives to reflect and build in us that character so we can be those examples to those around us.
Let's expand on that for just a moment here, Pastor Rowan. What do you see as the role for fathers today?
I think the role of fathers today is to walk in humility, to lead confidently, and to really be those people who listen, who react in wisdom, but also are not afraid to love others and love their kids in a way that is helpful in guidance and so forth. It's easy right now in this day and age because the role of fathers has diminished in really a fatherless generation to kind of take the back burner in the lives of our kids and our children. Sometimes there's this push to abdicate some of those leadership responsibilities, but really God calls us as fathers to be leaders, using the personalities and the gifts he's given us to be the leaders and examples to those in our lives, especially our children.
You know, I'm a father myself of two wonderful kids, Matthew and Carissa. They're adults now, obviously, in their 20s, but I remember when they were younger, they were going down a certain path. I've been down that path. It led to destruction. It wasn't a good path. And I'm trying to encourage them and support them and love them, saying, guys, don't go down that path. I've been down that path. It's not a good path to go down. But as a father, sometimes you have to let go and let God and just let them learn, I guess. And that's what's really hard, I found, as a father, as a parent.
Yeah, I'm learning that still, Hal, to be honest, is when to surrender our kids to the Lord, right? We desire for them to grow up in the fear and nurture of the Lord, but there comes a time when we can't control our kids, that we really need to leave them up to the Lord. I've had to do over the last actually year a lot of repenting to God and to my kids for things that I have did or said to them unintentionally, but as they've gotten older, they've said, Dad, you did this to me. And, that hurt me. And so I've had to do a lot of soul searching, a lot of going before the Lord and actually asking my kids for forgiveness for the ways in which I have treated them in the past, and asking the Lord to help me grow as a father as my kids grow older.
Is there almost a kind of reconciliation that fathers have to have with their children, perhaps?
Oh, ongoing reconciliation. That's what relationships are, is that ongoing reconciliation and so forth. But we also don't need to beat ourselves up, because we as fathers often are doing the best we can with what we've been given. And so it's important to remain humble and repentant, but also realize that we are not perfect and we fall short of those expectations, but to quickly remind ourselves that we can go to God for forgiveness, and we can go to our kids in and asking them to forgive us too. That's not showing weakness in a sense that we are weak people. That's actually showing a weakness and strength, that we too need the Lord as we father those around us, and therefore it's actually a strength. And there's, as the Bible says, there's strength and weakness when we display that in a humble reliance upon the Lord.
In my family, fathers traditionally were disciplinarians. Part of our job was to correct. But along with that, really encourage our children and teach them along the way. How successful of a formula do you think that is for today?
Yeah, Hal, I would say this. I would say society and culture have changed a lot over the last 10, 20 years. The way I used to view the role of a father in my life has changed in a lot of ways, and it's changed somewhat for the good, but also there are dangers that we can easily fall into if we don't remember those things. And so, yes, traditionally, the father has been the disciplinarian in the role of the family. Somewhat that has changed, where there's kids who grow up without fathers; they only have a single mom, and so that male authority can somewhat be a struggle for some. And so, how do we humbly bring that role back into the life of a family? It's difficult, and so it's a learning stage for many fathers in our generation. How do we display God's goodness, God's grace, but also the love of God through godly love and discipline in the family? It is a very difficult time in which we live in, and so we have to err on the side of caution at times, and be more encouraging, and not demand that we have this authoritative role in the lives of our kids, which has been looked upon now as a very bad thing. How do we show that authority, but also how do we show that with encouragement and humbly as well? That is the challenge for us as fathers today.
Pastor Rowan, many of us have never had the blessing of a father, and somehow I think we all long for our dads to say, son, daughter, I'm so proud of you. You are so amazing. Lifting up your children. How important is that kind of validation for our kids?
Oh, Hal, it is very, very important. For me as a kid, that was so important to have my father's recognition, to have my father's love and verbal affirmation was so important. I set my mission as a young father that I was going to do that. Have I always succeeded? No. But it's so important that as fathers, we are there for our kids, even and especially when they fall and fail and when they mess up. We need to be the first ones there to love and care for them during those difficult times.
And to lift them up, absolutely. So, Pastor Owen, for fathers who are watching our program right now on Miracle Channel, Bridge City News, and have never actually done that, said, you know what, I'm really proud of you and I love you, they find it a little difficult, what advice would you give them to get started with that?
I think it comes down to searching your own heart before the Lord, right? And really turning to Him and confessing the way in which you have not been there for your children in that way. And it's important because we have God the Father who loves us unconditionally. And so we can go to him with these things, and then we can really ask the Lord to help us go to our kids, go to our children, make that phone call, admit our wrongdoing and our sin, and then ask others to hold us accountable in that process. I just had a father figure who just died suddenly this week in my life, a mentor of mine. And the one thing about him is that he always challenged me as a father. He always said, how are you seeking the Lord, Rowan? How are you seeking the Lord in front of your wife and your kids? And the memory of that still sticks with me today, is that I need to be that example, that living example to my kids and the other children that are not my kids in my life, that look up to me as a father figure in their life.
You know, our condolences going out to you and your family with you losing your mentor. And let's talk about the importance of mentors as well, especially with maybe children who didn't grow up with a father but have that mentor, and that mentor can be a powerful, influential figure in that young person's life.
Oh, definitely. I would say this. I would say every father, every male who's listening out here, if you don't have mentors or men in your life that you can bond with and talk about the things of the Lord, talk about your struggles, then it's going to be extra. It's going to be extra harder to be the man that God has called you to be, and you need that in your life. You need men challenging you and examples in your life, speaking into your life, calling out your stuff when you need to, when it needs to be called out, and praying for you as you are doing the things that God has called you to do as a husband, as a father, as a worker, wherever you are. It is so, so important. I encourage every male who's listening out there to have some sort of mentor.
You know, one of the most common complaints about fathers seems to be, my dad didn't spend a lot of time with me. He was always at the office, always working, always on the road. So Pastor Owen, how important is it just to spend some quality time with your kids and really investing in them?
It is so, so important. And you'll fail. And there are times when they will not like you being in their lives, and they will reject your wisdom. They laugh at me all the time. Every time they go out, I say, remember wisdom, remember wisdom. And they now joke about it because they know I'm going to say it all the time. But it's important that we have that constant presence in their life, because that's what God our Father is to us. I'm preaching on Romans 8 this week, and it's a beautiful passage about the fatherhood of God in our lives, that he's our Abba Father, he's our daddy. He's always present with us in the spirit. And so we can't be always present with them, but we can pray for them, seek the Lord for them, and remind them that we love them in a way that no one else has the opportunity to love them as a father in their lives.
You know, many dads like to put on that real tough exterior, that macho image for their kids. But I wonder if it's more important to actually teach and model to our kids, like you mentioned earlier, to walk humbly, to take responsibility for our actions, and to really apologize when we mess up. Say, you know, son, daughter, my bad, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, it's so, so important. I come from that old school Hal where fathers, and I actually had a father that I grew up with until I was 18, and then I moved to the States and lived with my uncle, and then he became another father figure in my life, and he was tough as nails, and he really taught me what it means to and hold me accountable, and so I learned both sides of the coin in understanding that a father can be strong. A father can really be that strong leader in your life, but also a father needs to be humble. I still remember to this day when I made a major mistake, and my uncle, he's big and strong, and man, he put the fear of God into you. But when I made that major mistake, he didn't scream at me and yell at me. He walked up to me and put his loving arms around me and cried over me. And I still remember that to this day, that it was so unexpected. And I just wept. I just wept because that's what I needed. I needed a humble person to love me in my mistake. And that's what he did for me that day.
How about thoughts on how we can best honor our fathers in a very meaningful way?
Yeah, that is a great question. I have wrestled with that being a father, and even in my own struggles, in my own relationship, in understanding how I've responded to my father in the past. So I think it's important for us to be thankful to God, regardless of what our fathers have done to us. Right? That you may be out there and your father may have treated you very poorly in your life, but you can still be thankful for them, right? And you can pray for them. And I think it's important that we honor them by remembering even the things that they did for us that may have been small, but now as a father, those small things, I look back and go, man, they weren't small, they were mighty things. My dad loved every person, a homeless person, an addict. Every time I walked with him in downtown Sydney, Australia, he would stop and talk to the alcoholic, right? I still remember that. And that was passed on to me. And there is not a homeless person that I do not meet, that I do not look in their eyes and say hello. I honor my father because he exemplified that for me growing up as a young man in Sydney, Australia.
Rowan Crown is the lead pastor of Amazing Grace Community Church here in Lethbridge. Pastor Rowan, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Hal, for having me on this very important topic, and the Lord's blessings on you and the program.
Thank you so much, you as well. On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.